online, Lettice Borowski. Great to have you with us, as always, to kick off this new year on Sky News Breakfast. But we're starting with really terrifying and horrific news, aren't we, from New Orleans, which is front page of many, and The Guardian reflecting that number of dead to be 10. We now know it's 15. When these go to print, they did a fantastic job to get as much detail in as possible. But nonetheless, horrific way to start the year.
Well, a shocking way to start the year. You know, these were all sort of party-goers, revellers who were just out enjoying their night out. Happened around 3 a.m. as well. So really when parties, particularly places like Bourbon Street in New Orleans, would have been in full swing. We know the street itself as well was quite narrow, so people couldn't even get out of the way. And they're saying now as well that, you know, the music would have been loud and pumping. It's unlikely a lot of people would have even heard the car coming down the road. So it's terrible. The latest sort of news we're hearing at the moment is the FBI is saying that there are videos that have been resurfacing, or surfacing, I should say, which show this attacker talking about how he relates to ISIS, how he supports them and is going forward with that, and his sort of desire to kill people. What we're looking towards now, though, is really questions around bollards that should have been in place to protect streets like this. It was only last week when this happened in Germany, and again, these giant concrete bollards which were put in place to protect people seem to not be doing the job that they were doing. So there'll be a lot of questions raised in the coming days around why those bollards weren't in place in New Orleans and why they didn't protect people.
Yeah, the investigation ongoing by the FBI. More details to come on that story. A more uplifting story, I suppose, Benjamin. This time, NHS England are saying actually more diagnoses are being cracked in cancer stages 1 and 2, which is when the cancer can actually be helped, cured and treated.
Yeah, you don't get many positive healthcare stories, not in recent years, but this is indeed one. So 60% of cancers have been found early. There's a new target to try and increase this because, as you say, the chance of survival is significantly different. It's about 2.7%, which of course is quite a lot of people whose life prospects have been transformed. And they're focusing particularly on finding lung, breast and prostate cancers, which are among the 13 most common. And actually something they've rolled out, I didn't know this, they've got these incredible vans that can scan people to look for cancers, and they're putting them out at places like shopping centres. So you're going about your daily business, and then they just invite people in, random screening. And there's a guy in this story who says that he was completely healthy, he had no idea, and then they found lung cancer. He was devastated.
Quite terrifying as well, to just be going to the shops doing your Christmas shopping and then coming away with such serious news.
Terrifying, but also not nearly as terrifying as if they'd found it a year later, you imagine. So, you know, it sounds like a very good policy that's saving lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Take us through the Daily Telegraph. They've got a story on their front page, down at the bottom, Lettice. NHS obesity treatment quadruples in a decade. What's happening?
It's a slightly different angle on a health story, but yeah, it's obesity is quadrupled within a decade. So it's gone from around 442,000 in 2014, I believe, 2013, 2014, now to 1.9 million people who have, you know, clinical obesity and are having to have treatments on the NHS for that obesity. That's a shocking figure anywhere. And if that's only in a decade, it's quadrupled, you worry what it's going to be doing in another decade's time. This information also, though, comes alongside the sort of rollout of weight loss drugs on the NHS. And there have been a lot of critics at the moment saying that it's been going too slowly. So currently there's a battle between private and public of this. People on weight loss drugs on the NHS is right now at around 30,000 people.
And a long waiting list if you do want to go down that route.
And they're hoping over the next 3 years to increase it to 220,000 people. But from these sort of figures, 1.9, that's barely even going to be scratching the surface of the people that need this.
Yeah, and I mean, the cost of... Apparently, there's a poll last week. A fifth of the public would take those if those drugs were on the NHS. It would cost about £28 billion a year. But that's still a third of the cost that obesity costs our economy between the NHS and the damage to people's lives. I actually think we're at an inflection point with this. You know, if you look at the US, obesity figures have fallen for the first time in about 2 generations, which is an extraordinary turnaround, and they've got quite high take-up of this privately of these drugs. And so, I'm optimistic that we found something that could fix this, and the NHS looks to be willing to be paid that small fortune for it.
Right, well, the other big story everyone's talking about this new year is the damp, the soggy start to the new year. And the front page of The Sun of a car submerged in water, and we've got a report from our North of England correspondent Caterina Vitozzi in Stockport of people just
where I'm from.
unbelievably shocked by the rising water level there.
Yes, I mean, it always rains in Manchester, which, as a Mancunian and someone that went to Manchester Uni, we can
And I lived there for 11 years, so I know the pain.
So we all know.
They're familiar with rain, but I mean, this is obviously an extraordinary amount, and there's a prediction of 3 days of snow. There's a danger to life warning for coastal areas from extreme winds. And so, as The Sun sort of parodies this by saying no dry January, it's going to be the thing you want at this point in the year. I mean, I don't think the last thing you want is your car floating away at any time.
Also, this is coming at a time, again, people are coming back from their Christmas holidays. They're having to go back into work, and the rails are all down, and you're struggling to get back from your airport, or you're missing your flights. Again, this is just our infrastructure in this country seems to be creaking more and more. The more we have sort of extreme weather like this, and something really needs to be done to sort of sort it out.
And the disruption in more rural areas also. It doesn't often get the spotlight, really, but that's going to be a challenge moving forward. I wanted to end on a really curious story, and this is about a cow and IVF.
This is me.
Which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because it could potentially...
It's extraordinary.
...mean that cows and the future of farming is, well, less methane in the environment. Talk us through this.
Yeah, so in Dumfries, there is this herd of cows that they've been genetically amending since the 1970s, and this new IVF baby, Hilda the cow, produces considerably less methane than the average cow, and I couldn't believe this. Methane is 84 times more damaging than carbon dioxide. We've got big targets on cutting the damage that it can do, and so this new low methane cow could actually be revolutionary because the damage that this does and the targets that we've got, to be able to develop this is quite extraordinary. And agriculture accounts for 12% of our emissions in this country. So when you look at our net zero targets, when you look at our methane targets, fixing the cows, as it were, could do that.
Any initiatives that could potentially be positive are worth exploring, I suppose.
No, absolutely. As you say, there's so many pushes, Keir Starmer's pushes for more environmental, to challenge more environmental things like this. If anything can be done, the only thing is that right now this is sort of Hilda's one cow on her own, one calf, you should say. It's going to take a while to build up those herds to try and get this moving.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Lettice, Benjamin, thank you so much for your time. We'll catch up with you in the next hour. We're going to go for a short break now, but join us after that with all the top stories.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.